what was the basic need at the first place to launch the scheme itself? Because we have had so many schemes, centrally sponsored schemes. So what was the need for this particular scheme?
Thank you, first of all, for calling me to speak about PM Janman. It is a very important initiative of the Government of India. The need for this mission arises because while we have a plethora of huge diversity in the tribal communities, there are 75 groups of tribal communities. We call them the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Now, these PVTGs are amongst the most backward of tribal communities. And you will find that these communities are residing in very remote areas, in forested areas, in hilly regions which are inaccessible. And by and large, our experience has been that the fruits of development has bypassed them. There have been attempts in the past and till date to kind of have as many benefits of schemes as possible for them. But unfortunately, distances, non-awareness on their part, inability to reach them on our part, all of it has contributed in a certain way to keep them at a more backward stage than even the general tribal population, which is itself in general having parameters which are lower in quality than the rest of India. And therefore, the need to look at this nearly 39 lakh population, these PVTGs are very small in number. Each group is very small in number and totally they come to around 39 lakhs. And this 39 lakh strong population requires a helping hand, a means by which they would be able to contribute to the success of the India's development story. And therefore, there is a need for PM Janman. And I think having come up with that, our Honorable Prime Minister launched this PM Janman on Bhagwan Birsa Munda's birth anniversary, as you know, at Khunti, Jharkhand, on a day which has been notified as the Janjati Divas. So it's a matter of pride to us that during this Janjati Divas, we were able to bring the last mile Janjatis into the development module.
Ma'am, even among tribals, like we understand that as per the 2011 census, there are some approximately 11 crore population among the tribals. But even in this big group, who is the target for this particular Abhiyan?
For this Abhiyan, as I told you, there are 75 tribal groups. And these tribal groups are spread across 18 states of the country and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And why we call them PVTGs, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, is because they are at a stage where their characteristics are that there is a pre-agriculture level of technology and they are a stagnant or a declining community in terms of population. Literacy rate is extremely low amongst them and their level of economy is still at the subsistence stage. In many cases, they may not even have come into the cash economy in the same manner as we understand that. So the value of cash is not yet known to them. So this is the kind of people we are talking about when we talk about particularly vulnerable tribal groups. There have been certain inroads made, but the Abhiyan is an attempt to make these inroads in a very strong and convergent manner. 9 ministries are dedicated to the upliftment, to the development of these communities, to these 75 communities. And these 9 ministries have their work cut out for them. These 9 ministries have pledged, have in a certain sense promised, the promise of the mission is Har Ek Ko Ghar, electrification, connectivity, road connectivity, telecom connectivity, electrical connections, nutrition and health for all through mobile medical units where physical PHCs cannot reach, skilling for everyone, education for everyone, as I said, electricity for everyone, Har Ghar Nal Se Jal, the drinking water facility, Pakka Ghar for everyone. So we have all these and then livelihood interventions through the Vandhan Vikas Kendra of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs and through multi-purpose centers which are to be established where Anganwadis and PHCs are not yet there. So that is the kind of target of the 9 ministries that we are talking about that is envisaged here. And I am glad to report that the 9 ministries have in the last 2 months since the launch of the mission, they have worked overtime to ensure that they start sanctioning all these benefits to the deserving cases, to the eligible cases as soon as possible.
Ma'am, as you said, many of these tribal communities and groups won't be exposed to the cash economy. In this kind of a scenario, how would the benefits of financial inclusion reach them?
When this mission started, when the mission was launched, on December 15th itself, our ministry, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, had conversations with all the related ministries, and we had what we call a Manthan Shivir on PM Janman. Now, the Manthan Shivir was not a discourse, it was not a discussion platform alone. It was a platform for finalization of action plans on how each of these ministries would reach out to these habitations with whatever was their intervention that was their target under the mission. And thus, all the 9 ministries came out with finalization of action plans for the next 3 years to come, in which they would be able to reach out these benefits to these habitations. And therefore, today we are in a position to say that the interventions after the Manthan Shivir on December 15th, they have again embarked upon sanctioning of these projects, getting the project proposals from the various state governments, analyzing them, examining them, and then sanctioning many of those. So today we have all these convergent efforts in the next 3 years with about 15,000 crores amount coming from the central government. And today we are reaching out to these habitations, going to these habitations through the administration and finding out where land is, who is the person who has the patta who can be eligible for the PM Awas. So we are looking at each one of these ways in which, for instance, my own ministry is having Bandhan Vikas Kendras sanctioned in these PVTG habitations, with PVTG self-help groups being formed, or where such self-help groups are already there, by forming them into Bandhan Vikas Kendras. Our Bandhan Vikas Kendras or a livelihood intervention whereby people who are forest produce, minor forest produce collectors and gatherers, they are enabled to add value to those products and to sell them through what are called Bandhan Vikas Kendras, and to have better income prospects. And self-help groups, normally of 15 groups with around 20 members each, or will come together and form a Bandhan Vikas Kendra. But some of those guidelines have been relaxed for the PVTGs because these are small habitations, small communities, and we may not find those kind of numbers. Right. So each ministry is looking at reworking its guidelines, has already reworked its guidelines to find out where PVTG habitations can benefit.
Let's also talk about housing, which is one of the major components of this particular Abhiyan. A target of close to 5 lakh beneficiaries. And one number is this. And the other thing is an amount of 2.39 lakhs per house. So isn't it a meager amount? Is a proper house with the basic facilities viable in this kind of an amount?
PMAY, the PM Awas Yojana Gramin, is not new to the country. The PMAY's amounts have been fixed for the entire country, and we know that there have been quite a few success stories. In fact, the PMAY is one of the most popular schemes in the entire country, I would say. While the Ministry of Rural Development is a nodal ministry for this, and we do understand that the need for a Pakka house is felt throughout, and I think the PVTG community is no exception. And therefore, the amount itself can be one augmented, and they are not new to building houses. So we are looking at this being a very successful initiative, successful intervention of the government in these areas, because Pakka house is something that everybody aspires for, and we are sure that the PVTG would be able to benefit out of this. The amount itself is not as meager as we are assuming it to be, because there have been, as I said, this is the amount that is allocated for the rest of India also, and they are able to build houses through this. We do know that they have been doing it. So the PVTGs would also benefit from this intervention, is our view in its entirety.
Let's also talk about mobile communication in this era of technology. Mobiles are kind of almost indispensable. But given the kind of landscape and really interior areas where these PVTGs usually are, how viable it would be for the telecom companies to come and put up mobile towers there?
That is, of course, a challenge, and I think the Department of Telecom is already seized of it. In fact, they have started work on it, and I think the benefits have already started reaching these villages where we are finding that mobile towers are already being set up. As I said, the sanction for these projects is going on, and through those sanctions, we are finding that we are reaching these people much earlier than we could have ever dreamed of. So I think getting mobile connectivity is something that the Department of Telecom is seized of, and they have already started the exercise. So I think in the few months' time, it should be very clear that we would be able to reach these areas through mobile connectivity. I mean, that is not a vain hope. It is something that is actually happening on ground, even as we talk.
Ma'am, the scheme actually has lots of things to offer and really ambitious. But I'm sure you'd agree that any good scheme has to be closely monitored so that we can take mid-course corrections wherever we see that it's not going as per the plan. So, who actually would be monitoring this particular scheme, and what kind of intervention do you plan if you don't achieve those targets in the timelines which you have specified?
The way we view tribal development is through a convergence mode. There are 42 ministries, including our own, where we have what is called the scheduled tribe component. In
Yeah.
the scheduled tribe component, every ministry, through the schemes which are a part of the scheduled tribe component, allocate a certain percentage of their budget for that scheme for tribal development. So anywhere between 4.5% to about 20-25% of the budget is allocated to tribal development under around 250 schemes. Now, PM Janman draws upon the strength of the STC, the Scheduled Tribe component, and has made it incumbent upon the 9 ministries through their 11 interventions to ensure that these benefits reach the PBTG population. As I told you earlier, the guidelines of the schemes themselves have been modified to suit the PM Janman objectives. That is the first step through which the implementation of the mission has been ensured. The second is the synergetic effort through which it has been begun. As I told you, the Manthan Shivir had all the ministries concerned having their different workshops on finalization of their action plans. I mean, this was one of its kind effort, if I may say so. And that kind of an effort, that kind of a synergy that has been built up in the last 2 months, I think will continue in the days to come also.
Right.
Then there is a separate head of account that has been made for monitoring the PVTG expenditure. Then we have Prabhari officers who have been visiting the PVTG habitations, and I think that system would be continuing in the future also. And each ministry is eager to ensure that the benefits reach the PVTGs. And most important of all, the PVTGs have been the tribal community in general and the PVTG communities in particular, I would say, are not people who would be demanding anything, but they would be now aware of what they are actually eligible for. Awareness generation is one of our most important goals under the PM Janman also. And towards this end, we have already started on Good Governance Day, December 25th of last year, 2023. We started an IEC campaign beginning with in 100 districts, now spread over all the 188 districts where the PVTGs are located.
Mrs. Jaya, thank you so much for joining us in the program.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You were listening to a discussion on significance of Pradhan Mantri Janjati Adivasi Nyaya Maha Abhiyan. The participants were R. Jaya, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and S. Rangabashiam, Anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com